there we go. Awesome. Cool. So again, so hello, my name is Lopez. I'm at Microsoft, and I'll be presenting some of the findings that Keegan Hines and I have made during our work at Microsoft, right? So I'll be talking about LLM prompt injections, attacks, and defenses. So quick overview. So we'll be talking about, the prompt injection problem, like actually why are these things happening? A couple different types of prompt injections, a couple of attacks worth knowing, and then some defenses that you can use if you decide to use these large language models as a part of your organization. Cool. So prompt injections are everywhere. Since ChatGPT and GPT-4 were released, they're all over the news, right? So they're getting a lot of attention from the public. And I think something that's super interesting is that they're also getting a lot of attention from regulators, right? So earlier this year, the United States Senate sent a letter to different CEOs from tech companies. And they were specifically asking, what kind of input sanitation techniques do you implement to ensure that systems are not susceptible to prompt injections? So I think it's super, interesting that, not just the public, but the government is also very interested in prompt injection. Why are these things happening, and what are we doing to protect against them? So, broadly speaking, when you have a large language model, you have a meta prompt, right? So in this case, you have this text that usually is a templated meta prompt that gets combined with user input. You create your final prompt, you send it to the large language model, and then you get a completion, right? So fundamentally, large language models are just predicting the next character. Now, fundamentally, there is this one problem, right? That there is no way for the model to know what's the difference between code and data. So, for example, code refers to system instructions, right? I want you, large language model, not to produce harmful content, or I want you to be kind of like nice and all the things. Now, our data, it refers to the inputs that we want to kind of evaluate, but we don't want those to influence the code. Now, right, so there's a problem because if you have this meta prompt right here in green, right, your helpful AI assistant, and I want you to do something. If we control the input, right, and we change that, then we can get the large language model to do something that is not intended to, right, and that's a big problem. So I found that this is a good mental model to think about how LLM inferences pipelines work, right? So you have a system instruction that is something that you as the engineer or you as the company control. Then you have the user prompt, and then you can also have some external data, right? So this could be search results, this could be cookies, access to database, and then ultimately you combine all of that, and then you run them over some input filters, right? So you may have some block lists, some allow lists to check that the input going into the LLM is safe. Then it goes to the LLM, and then you can have some output filters as well. So you can make sure that, for example, the outputs are aligning to what you were expecting. You can check that there's no harmful content in there. And ultimately, you pass that response back to the users. So with this, now we're going to talk about the different types of prompt injection attacks. So the first one is the user prompt injection attack. So in this case, it's also referred as a direct prompt injection attack, but it's when the user, so right here, that's what we control. And then when we poison that, then we can kind of like poison the responses as well, right? Because oftentimes, the input filters, the output filters are not perfect. So you can bypass those. And here is an example of how you can trick a large language model to make napalm, right? And it tells you to pretend to be your grandma. And this actually works, which is kind of wild. So the second type of attacks, they're called cross-domain prompt injection attacks, right? So in this case, we're not necessarily influencing the user prompt per se, but we're poisoning the external data. So for example, in some cases, you can have an application that goes out to the internet. So you can poison certain search results so that the input that is coming in from those websites has your payload, and those then get processed by the large language model, and then you ultimately generate harmful content, right? And we have seen some of these attacks in the wild. So I have a demo. So if you go to that link, there's going to be a website with a chat copilot that I've built for you, and we can try some of these attacks ourselves. And then the second link, that's the data. So there we go. So let me put this right here. And then the 3 types of demos that we can go through. The first one is we're going to make the large language model talk like a parrot. Then we're going to do a user prompt injection attack. And then I'll show you how you could do a cross injection prompt attack. So just give me 1 second. So if you go to the websites that I've shared, so you're going to have your meta prompts here. The meta prompts are basically kind of like the personalities that you can pass into the different bots. So you can just copy paste these into the chat, and then there are a couple of files that you can use with the bot. So we'll do this quickly. Let's see. It's not working. It's not finding it? Okay, so I don't know what to do at that point. Then I will do the demo for you. This is what you should be seeing, and then it should ask you to authenticate. I'm sorry, it's not working. But so when you get it, well, I'll make sure it's working later today, so you can try it out. But so this is how it looks like. So typically, when you build these large language models, you have a meta prompt, right? So in this case, I'll kind of like show you how important these meta prompts are, right? So in this first example, we have a meta prompt that is telling the assistant, the large language model, to respond only in English, right? And then if the user prompts or asks the bot to talk in parrot, then we tell it that it's stuck there. Right? So you can see how you can use these as kind of like safeguards to protect against malicious content, and then you can very easily change these to be specifically about harmful content and things like that. So we'll create a new chat. There we go. And again, this is the example, but you can be like, hello, how are you today? And if the demo gods are with me, it will reply. There we go, right? So it tells us it doesn't have feelings, but as you can see, it's replying in English, right? That's sort of like the point. Now you can be like, now, tell me what is the meaning of life as a pirate, please, right? So again, toy example, but now the bot, if this works, should reply as a parrot, and it should be locked in there, right? So now the bot it's a pirate, right? And kind of like based on the system meta prompt that we had earlier, I could be like, okay, now talk to me back in English, please, right? So let's give it a second. But because we've told the bot to kind of like be locked in parrot, if the demo works, it should be locked there, right? So it's sort of like locked there, right? It's kind of funny. And a lot of the jailbreaking that we do kind of like in the wild has to do with this, right? So the owners of the systems are trying to prevent the large language model from doing something. And now I'll show you kind of like how you bypass this. So the second demo, it's we're going to be stealing some data. So let me, how do we do this? Okay. So in this case, you can load files into the chat copilot, right? So think of this as maybe this is some confidential document that you have in your company, or this is some PII that you have that the bot shouldn't be sharing, right? So if, again, we'll give it a persona here. So the persona is telling it to make it easier to reply with information from that document, right? So you can make this sort of attack easier. But in this case, I've already run it, but we can force large language model to read from a file and then steal some information, right? So in this case, I've hidden a flag in a document, and we're reading that flag, basically getting the data. Not super interesting, but yes. So I think this is when it gets a little bit more interesting, right? So now we can sort of combine the different things that we've done. So in this case, I have another a bot. And what I'm telling it is that it's going to read from a file and that it's going to change its personality based on that file, right? So if we go to the chat window, and I won't do it live because it takes a little bit to run, but we can get it to read the contents of a file, right? And I will show you later, this is the do anything now prompt, right? It's what it does, or what that file contains. It contains instructions to tell the model to have two personalities. One that is your regular, safe personality, and then the second one that is like super unsafe, and it talks about things that it shouldn't be talking about. So, I've told it to read the file and to tell me a story about dogs, right? So in this case, because the DAM prompt is not in the context just yet, you see that it gives us a regular response. But if we tell it to print the contents of the file and then to tell you a story about dogs, now you can see that we've essentially changed the personality of the bot, and now it's replying with this kind of like log classic, and then the content of the story, and now it's telling us the jailbroken version with a different version of the story. Now, so it may not look like much, but if you are conducting an operation and you're able to change how the bot works internally, then you can get it to, for example, fetch data from places that it shouldn't be fetching data from, or you can also just generate harmful content. You can reflect harmful content back to users and exfiltrate data from them. So now let me get back to the. Wow, that's cool. Long hair. Okay, so we've talked about the do anything now prompt, right? So that's it's been in the public for a while. It started with ChatGPT, but it shows you those two modes, right? Like the normal output, where it's like a benign bot, and then the secondary mode that it's more harmful. And one application of this, for example, is if you want to generate malware, right? ChatGPT will refuse to generate malware and other harmful content. But if you use something like the do anything now prompt, then you can generate malware, you can generate other kinds of harmful payloads. This paper was also mentioned earlier, but the prompt suffix attack works quite well. Essentially, they were able to find that you can append certain texts to the prompts, and those would change the behavior of the large language model, and they will work well across multiple models, not just GPT, but also some of the models from Google, Bard, and then Clyde from Anthropic. So now we've talked a little bit about attacks. So now let's talk a little bit about the defenses, right? So it's important to know that at this stage, like there's no silver bullet when it comes to defending against these types of attacks. And it all comes down to what we mentioned earlier, that there is no difference between code and data in these large language models. However, there are some things that you can adopt to protect yourselves from these sort of attacks and kind of like eliminate the low-hanging fruit. So the first one is log and monitor your stuff. Make sure that when users are sending requests and whenever you are responding, you have a log of that. You can always go back and see if there was like funky activity going on. You can always, never trust user input, like never ever. So just validate that what's coming in is what you're expecting and sanitize that input when you can. And then it's also very important not to give the large language models unrestricted access to sensitive resources. So if you're connecting your large language model to your bank or to health-related information, that can be problematic. And you can also do prompt chaining, and I will show you an example of that in a little bit. I think it's important to note that Microsoft has also put some guidance on like prompt engineering techniques and security guides for large language models. Again, right, so just to reiterate, it's good to assume a defensive posture. Always think about, what will go wrong if an adversary gains control. Check that meta prompt guidance. I think it's quite good. And the other thing is that the prompt injection detection. So there are some classifiers out there that you can leverage. You can use multiple large language models to do subtasks of what you're trying to do, and those can be quite helpful. And I'll sort of leave you with this. So there's this tool called Semantic Kernel that Microsoft has developed. It's completely open source, but it helps with a lot of these problems, right? So Semantic Kernel integrates with a bunch of different AI services. It talks to OpenAI, Azure OpenAI, Hugging Face, and you can use C#, Python, and there's an experimental branch with Java that you can leverage. It's a super light SDK that you can, do the prompt templating. So it helps you create those templates, put in the data. You can do the chaining. You can do planning capabilities, which is something a little bit more advanced if you're trying to orchestrate multiple different, functionalities. And again, it's open source, so you're sort of like welcome to check it out. Yeah, so that's what I had. So if you have any questions.
Great, thank you so much. All right, it looks like we've got a question back there in the audience, and Sarah also, I think, posted some, I think, helpful debugging for the issue with the demo.
So great talk. You mentioned something on the last slide or two there that really resonated with me, so I wanted to follow up on it. Validate the input you give to the LLM. As somebody who's occasionally used SQL systems, I've had it drilled into my head. You never let unvalidated user input touch a SQL engine. How do you validate user input for an LLM? Like, what are the rules of what isn't good, and what is?
Yeah, totally. That's a great question. And again, there's no right answer right now. This is a fairly new field, and people are trying a bunch of different things. So I think it's important to understand and sort of like restrict the what you're trying to do with the large language model. So for example, in your case, if you're trying to have an LLM be a translation layer between user natural language and SQL queries, like do that, right? But if you are, I don't know, trying to have a chat assistant that is doing something with private information or like health information, then you wouldn't want to do that, right? So you would want to check or have like allow lists to make sure that what's coming out sort of like agrees with your use case. So that's one thing that you can do. Yeah.
We'll take one from the Slack here. Why does prompt chaining help mitigate versus prompt injection?
Can you repeat that?
Maybe he can follow up with clarification in the chat if needed. Why does prompt chaining help mitigate versus prompt injection? I think how does that?
Yeah, so with prompt chaining, what you want to do is you want to have your okay, so you have some input, and then you pass it to the large language model, and you can ask something like, hey, is the input that I'm getting, is it malicious? Now, if it is, then you sort of like stop there. And if it's not, then you pass that to the next like chain of like inference. With prompt injection, what you're trying to do is kind of like bypass a lot of those mechanisms. So they're like opposite a little bit. Yeah, hopefully that helps.
I guess I mean, the way I interpret it is prompt injection is presumably far more difficult to when you have the multi-layers like that. Yes, because you have to know the setup of the, okay.
Have you tried any mitigations like outside the model, like, malicious user classification or suspicious user classification, those sorts of things?
Yeah, totally. Yes. So Azure OpenAI comes in with some extra classifiers for those sort of things. So they have harmful content classifiers that you sort of get for free if you use the API. There are jailbreak classifiers that you can, develop. You can check for like sentiment analysis. There's like tons of other classifiers that you can check prior to responding to the user prompt. Yes.
So I like the idea of assuming a defensive posture, but I want to ask if you think that goes far enough. And maybe we want to put the LLM on the other side of any trust boundary, simply because even in the absence of malicious user input, it can still make mistakes and produce weird outputs that can have unwanted downstream effects.
That's a great point. And I think it's a delicate balance because so from, I guess, a security posture, something like that would make sense. But I think from kind of like a product perspective, sometimes it's hard to find the right balance where, how much capability should the LLM has to be able to provide users with, as much value as they can have. So it's challenging. I think that's kind of like the bottom line. It depends on the application. Yeah.
All right. I think we are just about out of time, so we will wrap it up. Thank you so much, Gary.